G'day guys, Paul here. Hope your first week went well in Genesis 12 and 13, 14. This week we're up to Genesis 15 through to halfway through chapter 18. So I've got a fair bit of material to cover, but great stuff. This week Genesis this section is all about the covenant that was given to Abraham, but it's been filled out in greater detail as we go through these chapters. And we see Abraham's response to the covenant. He trusts God, but he's still unsure about how all this stuff's going to happen, how it's going to take place, and especially seeing he's got no kids, no land, no nation. So let's get into it. Intro question: what kind of covenants are we likely to be involved in these days? So what sort of agreements do we get into, contracts, promises, those sorts of things? Just thinking about how a covenant normally works, or an agreement, and what are the main features of a covenant. So just think about those things as a group, when they work, when they don't work, all that sort of stuff. Then read Genesis chapter 15, the whole chapter. Question 1 asks, Abraham shares his disappointment with God in verse 2 to 3 and in verse 8, with chapter 12, 1 to 3 in mind, the covenant promises. Do you think Abraham had a right to feel a bit disappointed with the progress of God's promises? Why or why not? I guess despite the promises of God, Abraham still didn't own any land, he didn't have any children, but the promise was that he would become a great nation, which is a bit of a problem, obviously, with his own land. He didn't have that. He'd be a great name, and he'd be a great blessing to all peoples on earth. So, do you think he had a right to feel disappointed? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe people thought, oh, yeah, that'd be pretty difficult. Second question, what does God say and do to reassure Abraham? And then just check out verses 4 and 5, 9 to 11, 17 to 21 there. It's all the different things God does. Verse 4 to 5, he takes him out, shows him the stars. 9 to 11, he says, bring some animals, he cuts them in half and makes a covenant. And then 17 to 21, he enacts that covenant by a smoking firepot, blazing torch going through the middle of them. So to reinforce the covenant that was made and bring that about. So that's question 2. Question 3 asks, verse 6 says that Abraham believed the Lord and he credited to him as righteousness. What did Abraham do to deserve these promises and to be right in God's eyes? So ask that question first, then have a flick over to Romans 4, 1 to 4. So just get people thinking about, what did Abraham do to deserve the promises? The answer I've put down is that Abraham's right before God solely because he trusts God that God will be faithful. That's why it says Abraham believed the Lord and therefore it was credited to him as righteousness. Righteousness came after his belief in God. God didn't choose him because he was righteous. So it's the same for our relationship with God. You might like to bring this up, that it's only through faith in Christ alone that we can be saved. It's not through works. I've got a little spiel there to cover Genesis chapter 16. If your group has heaps of time, then you could read it, but you're going to need a lot of time. So I've put in Genesis 16, Sarai fails to trust God's promises, and they try to speed on God's promises by Abraham. Abram having a baby via Hagar, their slave. The chapter leaves us wondering if Ishmael, the result of that, Abraham sleeping with Hagar, the result of that leaves us wondering if Ishmael might be the one the promises are fulfilled through. And then we move to chapter 17. We read verse 1 to 15. Excuse me. The question asks, what additions to the covenant from chapters 12, 1 to 3 are promised and expected here? So once again, there's fulfilling out of the promises that we looked at in chapter 12. Well, this is an extremely significant chapter in Abraham, the story of Abraham. We see in verse 5 that Abraham's not going to be just the father of a great nation, as we're told in chapter 12, but father of many nations. Verse 8 promised that the covenant will be eternal. and that his descendants will possess the whole land of Canaan. So two things there, filling out what the land is, and that this covenant is eternal. Also promises that Abraham and the descendants were in a unique relationship with God. In verse 7 and verse 8, he says, I will be your God. So verse 7, verse 8, I will be your God. God also gave the mark of the covenant, which he hadn't talked about before, but this is a new thing, circumcision. It was a sign that the person was a part of Abraham's household and under the promises of God, one of God's people. So the circumcision marked them out as unique and under that covenant. Question 5. How is it possible for us to be a part of the promises to Abraham? Well, this is bringing it back to us. This is one of the key application questions. Have a read through these verses. Romans 9, 6 to 8, Romans 10, verse 4, and Galatians 3, 6 to 9. It talks about how now that even though we're not Jews, we're not circumcised, we have the privilege, not necessarily circumcised, we have the privilege of being those from other nations who are blessed by the promises of Abraham, and that is through Jesus. We are grafted into the family, into Abraham's promises through Christ and what he's done. So we're able to be part of the people of God and part of that everlasting covenant through Christ. You might have other verses that you like to use there that you think could help as well. Feel free to use whatever you like to help people see that we are part of the promises of Abraham, part of that covenant, which is the overall idea of this passage. This study is looking at the covenant that God has. In question 6, from these chapters, which covenantal promises of God give you great hope? And when do you struggle to trust God's promises? So the first thing, which promises of God give you great hope? Which things that you looked at tonight or last week give you great hope that God has a plan for his people he's going to bring about, that it's an eternal covenant, that all sorts of aspects there that give you hope, and especially through Jesus as well. So think about that. And also, when do you struggle to trust God's promises? That might be an opportunity for people just to share, look, I understand that God has this plan, but it doesn't feel like that in my life at the moment. Or I know that eternity is going to be awesome, but I really struggle with the things of this world now. So it's an opportunity to express the great things of being part of the promises of God, and also to share how hard it is to trust God sometimes as we wait. Okay, my tip of the week is to pray for each member of your growth group, one member each day. Look, this is something that I've done in the past, and I've found really helpful when I've remembered to do it and be disciplined enough to do it, is just to pray for one person when I'm praying through my growth group, praying through my daily prayers, just to pray for one member of the growth group each day. It gives you a heart for the people in your growth group. It helps you love them even more, and enables you to ask God to be working to grow them more like Christ. So that's my tip for you guys. I hope you have a really great week, and hope you, if you've got any questions, any feedback on the studies or the video, please just send them in to me at paul.beeston@ccec.com.au. Okay guys, thanks, and I'll see you later.